Small towns have secrets. Some are whispered in grocery store aisles, others are buried 6 feet deep. But in Oak Ridge, Arkansas, one secret shattered a family in the most unthinkable way. A devoted mother, a trusted father, and a daughter caught in the middle of something no one saw coming. By the time the truth came out, it was already too late. What really happened inside the Browning family home that night? And was justice truly served? Tonight, we unravel a case that still haunts those who remember. Welcome to Vic's Crime Stories. Felicia Browning sits in a cold, gray prison cell, her fingers tracing the edges of a worn family photo. The colors have faded, just like the life she once knew. Her daughter's smile, frozen in time, stares back at her. She swallows hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Some say I killed my daughter. But the truth is, she died the moment I walked into that room. The sound of police sirens still rings in her ears, though it's been years. She remembers the flashing lights, the chaos, the way her screams filled the house long after Ella's body had gone still. The town of Oak Ridge, Arkansas, would never forget that night. Neither would she. Oak Ridge was the kind of place where folks left their doors unlocked and neighbors knew each other by name. A quiet town, tucked away from the noise of the world. And for years, the Browning family seemed like they had everything figured out. Felicia, a respected accountant, meticulous, devoted to her family. Sam, her husband, a hard-working man who could fix just about anything, except the cracks forming inside his own home. And Ella, their only child, bright, beautiful, with her whole life ahead of her. They were the kind of family people envied. The kind that sent out picture-perfect holiday cards and sat together in church every Sunday. But if you looked closely, if you really paid attention, you'd see the tension behind Felicia's tight-lipped smiles. You'd hear the silence at the dinner table where laughter should have been. Something wasn't right in that house. Felicia had always been protective of Ella, some would say too protective. Rules were strict, expectations were high, and Ella, she was starting to push back. Late nights out, hushed phone calls, a distance growing between mother and daughter. Felicia blamed it on teenage rebellion. What she didn't know was that something far worse was happening right under her nose. The signs were there. The lingering glances, the sudden shifts in conversation when she entered the room. The way Sam had become different. Less engaged. Distracted. And Ella? She had changed, too. The light in her eyes dimmed. She avoided her mother, pulled away when Felicia tried to reach her. Felicia had her suspicions. A mother always knows when something is off. But nothing, could have prepared her for what she was about to uncover. It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon. She came home earlier than planned, expecting the house to be empty. But Sam's truck was in the driveway. The door was unlocked. The air inside felt different. Then she heard it. Muffled voices. A laugh. A sound that didn't belong. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she stepped forward, her hands trembling. She moved toward the stairs, each creak beneath her feet tightening the knot in her stomach. And then, just as she reached the bedroom door, it happened. The moment that changed everything. What she saw in that room would shatter her world into a million pieces. It would take her freedom. It would take her daughter's life. And in the end, it would leave one question hanging over Oak Ridge like a storm that never passed. Was Felicia Browning a mother pushed to the edge, or a murderer? To the outside world, the Browning family had it all. A beautiful home in a quiet Arkansas neighborhood, a stable income, and the kind of family life people admired from a distance. Felicia Browning kept things in order. Everything had its place, the dishes, the laundry, even the way her daughter's future was mapped out in her mind. She was the kind of mother who believed in discipline, in structure. She wanted the best for her only child, but sometimes, wanting the best can feel like something else entirely. Sam Browning, her husband of 20 years, was the opposite in many ways. He wasn't the type to overthink things. He worked hard, came home tired, and spent his evenings nursing a cold beer in front of the television. He had always been a man of few words, but over time, those words grew fewer. Felicia noticed, of course. She noticed everything. The way he barely looked up when she spoke, the way he lingered at work a little longer than he used to. But marriages go through phases, don't they? And then there was Ella. Their daughter, their pride and joy, or at least, that's how Felicia spoke of her. The truth was a bit more complicated. At 18, Ella was pushing against the walls her mother had spent years building around her. She was bright, full of life, but she was also restless. She wanted more freedom, more choices, more say in a life that had already been planned for her. And Felicia? She just wanted to keep her safe, even if that meant keeping her close. People in town always said Felicia was a devoted mother. Strict, yes. Maybe a little overbearing. But wasn't that a good thing? Wasn't it better than the alternative? Ella's best friend, however, saw things differently. She remembered the nights Ella spent at her house, the way she talked about feeling trapped, like every move she made was under a microscope. She spoke about her mother's expectations as if they were a weight pressing down on her shoulders. College was already chosen. Friends were carefully monitored. Dating? Not a chance. Felicia called it love. Ella called it something else. And Sam? Sam had learned to keep quiet. He wasn't the type to argue. He let Felicia handle the details, the decisions, the rules. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where he seemed absent even when he was in the room. A coworker once mentioned it in passing, how Sam had a way of letting his eyes wander. Nothing obvious. Nothing anyone could prove. Just little things. A waitress he paid a bit too much attention to. A lingering conversation with a woman who wasn't his wife. Harmless, maybe. Or maybe not. But who would ever question the Brownings? They were the family that had it all together. The kind that sent Christmas cards in the mail and waved to their neighbors on Sunday mornings. No one would have guessed that inside their home, cracks were forming, quiet and unnoticed. Until the day everything fell apart. At first, it was nothing. Just small things. Things Felicia barely noticed, or maybe, things she didn't want to notice. Ella had always been independent, or at least, as independent as Felicia allowed her to be. But lately, she had been pulling away in ways that felt different. She skipped family dinners more often, claiming she had school projects, but her textbooks remained untouched in her room. Her phone, once carelessly left on the kitchen counter, was now locked, clutched close to her chest. Conversations became shorter. Eye contact became rarer. Then there were the moments between Sam and Ella. Strange, fleeting moments that made Felicia pause, if only for a second. A look exchanged across the living room. A stiffness in Sam's voice when Ella entered the room. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't something she could name. But it was there. A shift. A tension. And then, one night, she heard them. Felicia had always been a light sleeper. It was a habit formed over years of motherhood, listening for the creak of a door, the sound of soft footsteps. That night, she woke without knowing why. The house was dark, still. But then she heard voices. Soft, hushed voices coming from downstairs. She sat up, straining to listen. Sam. His voice was low, careful. Then Ella. Her voice even quieter. Felicia couldn't make out the words. Just the tone. A softness that made something in her stomach twist. She slid out of bed, moving toward the staircase, her heart beating just a little too fast. By the time she reached the bottom step, the voices had stopped. The kitchen was empty. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. She told herself she was imagining things. But then, a few days later, she noticed something else. Ella had borrowed her perfume. Not unusual, except it wasn't just any perfume. It was the one Sam liked. The one he had bought for Felicia on their anniversary years ago. The one he always complimented. And Ella? Ella had never been interested in perfume before. Felicia wanted to brush it off. Wanted to believe it meant nothing. But the unease had settled in now, deep in her bones. And then there were the memories. Looking back, maybe it had always been there, waiting to be seen. Sam had always been the easy one. The fun one. He never scolded Ella for breaking curfew, never lectured her about responsibility. While Felicia made schedules and rules, Sam made jokes. He took Ella on spontaneous outings, let her eat ice cream for dinner when Felicia wasn't home. She had resented it at times, the way he made her feel like the bad guy. But had it been more than that? Had there been moments she had ignored? Times when their laughter had lasted just a little too long? Felicia didn't know. Not yet. But the questions had started. And soon, she wouldn't be able to ignore them. Felicia wasn't supposed to be home yet. She had planned to stay late at the office, finishing up reports that no one would thank her for. But something in her chest felt heavy that day, something she couldn't name, a quiet pull dragging her back toward home earlier than usual. It wasn't intuition, not quite. Just the restless feeling of a mother who knows when something is off. As she turned onto their street, the sight of Sam's truck sitting in the driveway made her pause. He shouldn't have been home yet. Not at this hour. Not when he was supposed to be on site until the evening. Felicia sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, listening to the rhythmic tick of the engine cooling. A strange sensation curled in the pit of her stomach, a whisper of unease that grew louder with each passing second. When she finally stepped inside, the house felt wrong. Not empty, but still. The kind of stillness that hummed with something unseen, something waiting to be discovered. The air was thick, carrying a scent that didn't belong, a faint trace of her own perfume, but layered with something else, something unplaceable. She shut the door softly, her heartbeat pressing against her ribs. Then, from upstairs, she heard voices. Muffled. Low. Urgent. And then, silence. Felicia stood at the bottom of the stairs, breath hitching, ears straining. The silence wasn't normal. It was deliberate. Someone had heard her come in. One step. Then another. She moved slowly, cautiously, her fingers brushing against the railing as if it might anchor her to reality. A part of her was already bracing for what she might find, though she wasn't ready. Could never be ready. At the top of the stairs, Sam's phone lay on the hallway table, its screen glowing with a new message. A single line. Tonight? Same place? And the sender's name, Ella. For a moment, the world tilted. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. But the more she stared, the clearer they became. The letters burned into her mind, searing, undeniable. Her feet moved before she could think. The door to Ella's room was ajar. Felicia pushed it open, and the breath in her lungs vanished. Sam. Ella. Together. No space between them. No excuses that could explain away what she was seeing. Time fractured. Her mind refused to piece it together, refused to accept the shape of this nightmare. Her own voice felt distant, foreign, barely more than a whisper. No, this isn't real. Her hands shook. Her whole body shook. You, my daughter, how? Ella's eyes were wide, frozen, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Sam, her husband, the man she had built a life with, lifted his hands, stammering out words she didn't hear, couldn't hear. The room felt too small, too hot, pressing in on her from all sides. Felicia moved without thinking, reaching for Ella, grabbing her wrist as if holding on to her could somehow undo what had already been done. Ella jerked away. Too fast. A misstep. A stumble. And then, a scream. A sharp, raw sound that tore through the air. Felicia saw it happen as if in slow motion. The way Ella's foot caught the edge of the rug. The way her body twisted, arms flailing. The way her head struck the wooden edge of the nightstand with a sickening thud. Then, silence. Felicia couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. Ella lay still, her eyes open but unfocused, the life already fading from them. And then, Sam's voice, frantic, breaking, desperate. Ella? Ella, get up. But Ella didn't move. The house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene now. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in restless colors, their glow flickering against framed pictures of a life that, just hours ago, had seemed intact. The sirens had long faded into the night, but their echoes remained, pulsing through the floorboards, hanging in the air like ghosts refusing to leave. Felicia sat on the floor, her arms wrapped around Ella's lifeless body, rocking her the way she used to when she was small, when a scraped knee or a bad dream could still be soothed with a mother's embrace. But no comfort could undo this. No whispered promise could bring back what was lost. Her daughter's body was limp in her arms, cooling with each passing second. Felicia held on anyway. The officers stood in the doorway, uncertain at first, watching the broken woman clutch what remained of her world. Then came the voices, stern, urgent, pulling her back to reality. Hands reached for her, pried her fingers away, lifted Ella's weight from her lap. The warmth was gone. All that was left was the emptiness. And then, Sam's voice. Sharp. Accusatory. She pushed her. The words cut through the air, striking with more force than any slap could. Felicia turned, eyes wide, searching his face for some sign that she had misheard, some trace of the man she had once trusted. But there was nothing there. No grief. No hesitation. Just a pointed finger, a damning statement, and a look that sealed her fate. They took her in cuffs. She didn't fight them. There was no fight left in her. The courtroom was colder than the cell she had spent the last few months in. Every seat was filled, every eye trained on her, waiting for the verdict that would determine if she was a grieving mother or a murderer. The prosecutor painted her as unhinged, a woman pushed too far, a mother who had snapped. They described her controlling nature, her perfectionism, the cracks in her carefully curated life. They called witnesses, neighbors, friends, even old coworkers, each one adding another stone to the weight pressing down on her. And then there was Sam. He took the stand, his voice shaking just enough to make it sound real. He spoke of the moment Felicia lunged, how Ella had pulled away, how it all happened so fast. She reached for her, he said, but it wasn't to comfort her. It was to stop her. To punish her. Felicia barely recognized the man sitting in the witness box. This wasn't the husband she had built a life with, this was someone else. Someone willing to let her drown to keep his own hands clean. Her lawyer argued for the truth. That she had only reached for Ella in desperation. That it was an accident. That grief and guilt did not equate to intent. But the jury didn't look at her like a mother in mourning. They looked at her like a woman who had let rage take control. The deliberation was short. The verdict, inevitable. Guilty. Manslaughter. 15 years. The gavel fell. The sentence was read. As they led her away, she turned once, hoping for one last glimpse of the life she had lost. But Sam didn't look at her. He never looked back. The walls of a prison cell do not care who you were before you stepped inside. They do not care that you once lived in a house filled with warmth, with family, with a future that, in another timeline, might have remained untouched. They do not ask questions, and they certainly do not provide answers. They simply exist, silent, unchanging, and indifferent to the lives they contain. Felicia Browning learned this quickly. She learned that time moves differently when you are counting the days not by a calendar but by the echoes of your own thoughts. In the quiet, in the absence of everything she once held dear, she had nothing left to do but think. And so, she did. She thought about Ella. About the small girl who once reached for her hand in parking lots, who had clung to her waist after nightmares, who had, for years, been the single most important thing in her life. She thought about the slow shift, the changes that had happened right in front of her, Ella pulling away, becoming someone Felicia didn't recognize, someone she hadn't tried hard enough to understand. She thought about control. The way she had gripped Ella's life too tightly, believing she was protecting her, guiding her, shaping her into the woman she was supposed to become. But had she been guiding her? Or had she been suffocating her? And when had Ella stopped listening? When had she started looking elsewhere for comfort? For love? Felicia would never know exactly when her daughter slipped away. Perhaps it had been years before that night, long before that room, before the confrontation that shattered everything. Maybe, by the time Felicia had tried to reach for her, it had already been too late. And then there was Sam. The man who had stood in court and spoken words that sealed her fate. The man who had pointed the finger, who had let her take the fall, who had walked away from the wreckage as though he had not helped build it. She had loved him once. She had built a life with him, trusted him, believed in him. And in the end, he had chosen himself. But what did it matter now? The trial was over. The verdict was set. The world had decided who she was, a woman consumed by rage, a mother who had lost control at the worst possible moment. That was the story they told. That was the version that lived in newspaper headlines, in courtroom transcripts, in the whispers of strangers who thought they knew the truth. And maybe they were right. Or maybe they weren't. Somewhere, beyond the bars of her cell, life moved on without her. The house she had once lived in sat empty, gathering dust, its rooms frozen in time. The picture frames still held the same faces, smiling in moments that no longer existed. If you found this story important, share it. Let more people see what really happens. And if you want to hear more true crime cases like this, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories out there, some waiting to be told, others still unfolding. This was Vic's Crime Stories. See you next time.